Music theory. The basic building blocks in music are pitch and rhythm. Pitch is the highness or lowness of a note. Rhythm is how the notes are arranged to make a melody. All melodies use pitch and rhythm, so the melody sounds like a melody. Half steps and whole steps. To understand pitch, you need to know about half steps and whole steps. An example of a whole step is from A to B. What a whole step is. A to B. An example of a half something in a whole step, something is separating the two notes in the whole step. Like from A to B, A sharp is separating A and B. In a half step, there's nothing separating the notes, such as B and C. There's no B sharp in the middle. That also means that A to A sharp is a half step too. Octaves. Octaves are when one note repeats, but the notes have different pitches. For example, there are 7 A's on a piano. The third A to the fourth A is an octave. To here, they're both A's, so it's an octave. Grand staff, bass staff, and treble clef. The grand staff, bass clef, and treble clef. When reading music, you see clefs. Clefs are where notes are written down, either on the lines or in the spaces. The treble and bass clefs are the most common types of clefs. Together they form the grand staff. A good way to remember notes on the lines on the treble clef from bottom to top are E, every, G, good, B, bird, D, does, and F, fly. The spaces on the treble clef from bottom to top spell face. To remember the notes on the bass clef from bottom to top are G, good, B, boats, E, do, F, float, A, always. To remember the notes on the bass clef are A, all, C, cows, eat, and G, grass. All cows eat grass. Ledger lines. When notes get too low or high for the clef, you can just switch to a different clef. But instead of doing that, you can just use things called ledger lines. So you can use the same clef instead of moving to a different clef. Middle C. There's a C between the clefs in the grand staff. This C is called middle C because it's in the middle of the clefs in the grand staff. Middle C always has one ledger line when shown over the bass clef or the treble clef. Octava G clef. The G clef can be shown with an 8 over or below clefs. When the 8 is put above the clef, it means the note written is supposed to be 1 octave higher. And if you put the 8 below the clef, the written music is supposed to be an octave higher. Sharps and flats. A sharp is when you raise the pitch by 1 half step. And a flat is when you lower the pitch by a half step. Sometimes sharps and flats can be on the same key. Beats and measures. Beat is the rhythm of a song. An example of a beat is 1, 2, 1, 2. Beats are kept in groups called measures. Measures are ended when there's a line. Double lines, the same size as the measure lines, indicate the beginning of a new section. If the second line is thick, that means it is the end of the melody. A beat is roughly equal to 1 second. Notation symbols. The most basic notation symbol is called a whole note. A whole note and looks like an O. If you cut that in half, you get a half note, which has a whole note with a line sticking out from the right all the time. A half note has 2 beats. If you cut that note in half, you get a quarter note, where the circle of the half note is colored in. 1 quarter note has 1 beat. If you cut that in half, you'll get an eighth note. And if you add a curvy line called a flag to a quarter note, you get an eighth note. An eighth note is equal to 1/2 of a beat. After that comes 16th note, 32nd notes, and a 64th note. To represent these notes, you need to add more flags underneath the first. If you double 64, you'll get the next number, which is 128th note, and so on. After 64th note, it is rare to get a note bigger. Beams. Beams are just another way to write eighth notes and other smaller notes without using flags. You just need to keep on adding lines to the beamed eighth note to get a 16th note. If the beam note has two lines, that means it's the 16th note. 2 beamed 16th notes. For every note, there is an equivalent rest. A rest is a period of silence. A whole rest is as long as a whole note, and so on. Ties. Ties are when you can join 2 notes together. Ties can replace dotted notes. They can also be used with 2 notes. They can only be used with 2 notes that have the same pitch. And finally, intervals. Intervals are how far a note is from another note. From C to D is a first, and from C to F is a third. There are also major and minor intervals. Sixths, seconds, thirds, and sevenths can be either major or minor. Firsts, fourths, and fifths are all perfects. There are also augmented and diminished intervals. If you take a major or perfect interval and enlarge the note by a half step, it is an augmented. If you take a major or a perfect interval and enlarge the note by a half step, it is augmented. If you take a minor or a perfect and lower the pitch by 1/2 step, then it is diminished.